There are, and I've talked about or I've alluded to it, there are a number of different tools that we get to play with as Wi-Fi professionals. Well, I might as well name a couple at least. There's some common names. Fluke used to own some of them. I know they still do some testing devices, but they spun out. NetScout now does, or NetAlly, I think. NetScout, NetAlly. There's some nice handheld testers to help find the APs when you can't find them because it's buried underneath the drop ceiling or behind drywall. There are a couple different tools that are also have some spectrum analysis capabilities. Ekahau has one it's been the standard for the most part for the last, basically for my career. You'll hear the Sidekick talked about often enough, and chances are, if you do enough of this, you'll see a Wi-Fi heat map probably done in Ekahau. I don't think I have any in my presentation, but the problem with some of those tools is for the average installer, the average tech that's in the field, if this is just part of your job but not the job you do, some of those tools can have a steeper price point. They're not things that you're going to go out on your own and just invest in. It's not like you're going to, the hardware store and you're going to pick up a $10 hammer or whatever. It's not something like that. Some of these tools are thousands of dollars and require software subscriptions and whatnot, and in some cases training as well. But you don't necessarily need tools, right? I mean, you've got your cell phone. So there are ways with Android and Apple devices where you can get a decent idea of signal strength just from looking at your phone. I believe they've built it into the Mac OS now as well, where you can kind of just look at the Wi-Fi and drill in to see what my signal strength is. You'll know your SNR and things like that. It requires you to have the laptop, but chances are you're probably doing a deployment with a laptop anyways. If you have a laptop, there are tools. I'm a big fan of one called Wi-Fi Explorer Pro, which is on version 2 now, which is a company called Intuit Bits, a gentleman by the name of Adrian Granados. I'm going to show a screenshot of his tool in a little bit here. But it started to run on Mac. It also now runs on Windows, I believe, or will. I'm not a Windows person, so I can't speak to that. But it uses your Wi-Fi adapter in your laptop and shows you your spectrum. It'll show you what's around you. It'll show you signal strength. It'll show you your neighbors, so you'll be able to see if you've got any interference. If you're remote, and this happens to me a lot, maybe not so much for field techs, but I've had time in the past where I've had to support customers remotely, sites remotely, and they do make, Raspberry Pis are a wonderful tool. There's a lot of other small single board computers that are, I don't want to call them cheap, but they're relatively inexpensive, a couple $100 for a nice kit, and you can configure one of them with open source software to basically function as a Wi-Fi probe of sorts, send it out to the site, plug it in, and it'll phone home and tell you how the site's behaving. So there's a lot of different ways to get a lot of information out there, and not everything requires an arm and a leg or a heavy investment from you or from your company. So that's a nice thing. There are some free tools, I believe. I don't know if he still does it, but Wi-Fi Explorer used to have a light tool, which gave you some of the functionality. And again, I talked about it before. If there is budget and there is an option for it, the design tools are invaluable. But again, not everybody can have the tools. Not everybody has the budget. You go out to the site, you have your cell phone. You got to be able to call up a buddy, stream your music from your streaming device of choice, and walk around the room and figure out, am I starting to buffer in a certain spot? Do I lose coverage? Do I have no signal here? It's not the most scientific way to do it, but it is something that you'll have on you no matter what, probably. And ultimately, depending on the deployment of APs, some vendors, some platforms are building in some additional advanced capabilities into the APs themselves that will allow you to get some really neat, interesting metrics to help you troubleshoot problems. You could do speed test. I'm not a huge fan of speed test, to be honest, or at least not in the way that a lot of my customers tend to use it, because the argument from me is that speed test, whether you go to Ookla or speedtest.net, or I think there's a couple other ones out there, you're testing the backbone, really. You're testing from your core router to the internet. So you could get a really poor speed test and it might not necessarily be indicative of a Wi-Fi problem. It's entirely possible that you could do a wireless speed test and it's actually indicative of a core network problem. But because you're doing it from a wireless device, people jump to conclusions and say Wi-Fi is slow. And one of the things I did in a corporate environment, which I know is not practical for everybody, but there is, I cannot remember the name of the tool. I'm drawing a blank right now, but there is actually a way to effectively do like a speed test server on like a Linux box or laptop or VM, if you will, and you just build it up, you give it an IP address. We did this in a corporate setting because we had customers that love to use speed test as the go-to end-all be-all. And we had one time where we knew it was a wired network issue and they didn't believe us. So we built the internal server, and instead of hitting, a public IP address, we were hitting an internal corporate IP address that was the IP address of our server. At that point, it was testing how good we were from the Wi-Fi to that box before we even got to the edge router. And we were able to show like a twofold, threefold increase in the speed test. At which point they said, well, yeah, maybe we do have a wired problem. So that's a long-winded way of saying, like, it's not a bad tool if it's the only tool in your toolkit, but be careful putting too much stock in it, because if you have the ability to do a wired speed test as well, do that to validate it. Because if you're not getting any faster on the wired, then either maybe you're at the max speed of the link, or that link is misconfigured or something like that. I don't put a lot of stock in speed tests just because of that.